Hi everybody. Thanks for joining my channel. And before we get started, today I'm going to talk about India outbound, Australia inbound. So that means you're going from India into Australia, and we're looking at PR categories 189, 190, 491, which is the newly replaced 489. So recently, just on Saturday night, November 16th, that there was obviously changes in the point system. So regulations 6D, it was updated with points, and I'm going to read out some of those points as well. And at the same time, today I'm just going to quickly talk to you about what are the problems being faced for Indian nationals going to Australia on the 189, 190, 491. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is skills assessment. If you are an Indian national and you're applying for a skills assessment, the problem that I think a lot of us have been facing, and including myself, is the fact that a lot of documents in India are not organized, and they're not streamlined. Okay, so what happens is that a lot of people think that, oh yeah, I'm following the rules and I'm getting this, that, and everything done. But the biggest problem, and I honestly don't think that someone who has not been in Australia would understand how to do this, because you must understand how the Australian system works. And so, why do you do a skills assessment? The skills assessment is actually for people to be um, converted from like Indian degree to an Australian degree. So if you're an engineer, do you have the same 4 year degree that an Australian person has? If you're a doctor, have you done the same 5 year MBBS degree? If you're a lawyer, have you done the same 4 year degree? Whatever it is, right? And so if you do not have any of this kind of matchups, then that's why you do a skills assessment, so that they can tell you, yes, you're matching up, no, you're not matching up, you're not on the equivalent level, no, you're going to move in, you're not going to move in, all this kind of stuff. Okay. So during the skills assessment phase, what I have been finding out is that a lot of people just don't have the documents. Okay. And obviously, I do a lot of statutory declarations. I get everybody to statutory declaration, everything. Because if you don't have the documents, you can't make them up. Okay. And yes, you can get letters from lawyers and doctors and all this kind of stuff, but ultimately the biggest problem that we face is that the documents are just not up to scratch. And so I will actually talk about how I deal with different um, job codes. We'll put them as we go. So after this video, I'm just going to make a quick one for this video as an overall, and then I'll talk about doctors, lawyers, and all of that. Okay, going into Australia. So what I generally do is segregated. We have separate documents for each assessing body, and the via migrate way of doing it is very different to another agent's way. And the reason for that is because I have an agent sitting in Australia, and I sit outside of Australia, meaning that I travel around. So I would go to Singapore, I'd go to Malaysia, I would go to India, Cambodia, China, wherever. I would go around the world. And when I do that, I'm actually meeting people, and I'm also learning about how different governments work and how the documentation system works. So, like, I recently did an application for someone from Saudi Arabia, and in Saudi Arabia, they don't have taxation. Um, and the taxation system is very different. Like, they don't tax people. So, how is that compared to someone in Australia? In Australia, we get taxed for everything. And so when we get taxed for everything, pretty much it means that they have a record, because we have to pay our tax to the government. So what makes a person on an equivalent level to someone in Australia? I don't know, because frankly speaking, it's not something that just comes just off the cuff or just out of our brains. It's something that we have to actually translate. We have to talk to vet assess, or we have to talk to Engineers Australia. We have to say, oh no, we don't have these documents, but we have these documents. And we have to find equivalent levels. So you also must understand that when you come to somebody like us, or especially by Migrate, we really ask you the question of why are you migrating? Because when we understand what and why, then we are able to kind of figure out, oh right, this pathway might be not right, or this might be right, or whatever it might be. And this is so important in choosing a 189 category, a 190 category, or a 491 category, because you see, we have people come up to us and say, hey, you know what, I just want to go and work in Australia for like 4 years. And then I would be like, boom, you know what, why don't you just go and do 4 years in the 491, see if we can get something regional for you, go and see if you can work in something in a regional area, or go and at least stay in a regional area and travel to the city some 40 kilometers or 50 kilometers away. I mean, what's their trains and public transport in Australia is awesome. So a lot of the time we don't actually realize that the options that we are given or we're faced with are not it has to be a little bit practical, and I have to be able to give you that advice. So if I know exactly why you're migrating, then I will say, okay, you know what, this or this or this. Because I've actually seen people that go and say, hey, you know what, I want value for money, and I only want the 189. I want to move anywhere in Australia, whatever it is. And they go to Australia and they hate it. They completely hate Australia. And they hate Australia because I miss my mama's cooking, I miss having a maid, I miss having this, I miss having that. But you know what, realistically, that is what it is. Australia doesn't, it gives us freedom of speech, it gives us democracy and so many things, but then there's certain things that we have to respect. And that is things like maybe not having a maid, or not having someone to drive us around, or whatever. And because some of us are actually, we've grown up with certain things, some of us are not always happy when we have to do it ourselves. Okay, so I have seen people, and this is us being very, very realistic. This is actually being very, very realistic. We've actually seen people that have actually come back, and they've just kept their PR. And then I've even seen a doctor actually say, I need to reapply for my permanent residency because I lost it, because he actually got it, and then he left Australia, and he didn't know what to do or how to do it. So he didn't know the resident return visa and everything, and he just lost it. So now, obviously, the rules are changing, just like how it did on November 16th, and it's gone. So the next thing I wanted to quickly talk about is skills assessment is done. So the next thing after you get a positive skills assessment is your EOI. For the love of God, the EOI is possibly one of the hardest things next to the skills assessment. Your application itself is easy, all right? I think it's a cakewalk compared to actually getting through a skills assessment and getting through your EOI. The reason for this is you, even though if you think, oh yeah, my friend is doing multiple EOIs and all of that, you probably don't know that immigration is probably sitting in the background deleting all your EOIs. So what happens with the EOIs is that there's a ranking system. And so, yes, it goes on a date timestamp, and it's how fast people have put them in and everything like that. Fantastic. So some smart people say, hey, you know what, I'm going to put 10 EOIs in, 15 EOIs in, whatever it is, all different combinations, whatever. Okay, fantastic. But the reality is that over a period of time, it's probably going to get scrapped. Okay. But aside from that, a lot of you probably also didn't know that when you submit an EOI for skill select, there are also individual applications depending on your ANSCO code to individual states and territories. So if you have applied for 189, then you just need to do a skill select. But if you've applied for 190, then you need to apply for you need to look at your job code, and then you need to look at occupation ceilings, and all of this information is readily available on the immigration website. And then after that, you actually need to you look at the occupation ceiling. Sorry, I'm just thinking of how I do it. You look at the ANSCO code, you look at the occupation ceilings, and then you look at where it's open. So obviously you go back to ANSCO, and then you see where it's open. So you see, whether it's open New South Wales, whatever. And then you need to go to individual websites, and then you need to check and see whether it's open or closed, because it's actually very, very technical. You will not know that even though it says it's open on an ANSCO site, that it actually could be closed in the state or territory. So you might be sitting there thinking, oh, you know what? Oh, you beauty, I'm coming from Australia, I'm coming from India, and I'm going to be able to get a invitation in New South Wales. But you did not realize that it's probably closed in New South Wales. Okay. And they don't always update this in the ANSCO search, and they do now, they're doing it. But sometimes, if it's different, they close it overall, but you'd probably have to download the PDF list, and then only you'll be able to see which is open and which is closed. So it's very, very tricky. And mind you, if you're sitting there without an invitation, then it's possibly one of these reasons. The next reason that you're probably not getting an invitation is because there's a quota. Even though they advertise that you're getting 160, Australia's giving 160 people invites and everything. No, it's not. Realistically, I think each state and territory for 189 and 190 and 491, they only get about 4,000 or 5,000 quota per year. Okay. So overall, there's about 7 states, which means that it's about 35,000. And then on top of that, we have 186, 187, 494. We've got a lot of different work categories. Okay. So all of that encompassed becomes 160,000. Okay. It doesn't just come 160,000 from one category or two categories. It's all the categories. It's about 90 different categories. But for the work categories itself, or not the work, the migration categories, which usually have a one is permanent usually. So employer sponsored, RSMS, ENS, all this kind of stuff is usually there. And what happens is, if you fall into one of those categories, there's a quota. Everything has a quota. So you're probably sitting there saying, hey, I'm going to get an invitation because I got 80 points, I got 90 points. And you're sitting there scratching your head going like, why am I not getting an invitation? What's happening? Blah, blah, blah. And you know what? Realistically, it's because they've either already exhausted all their invitations for the year by December, like they're already maybe halfway through, or they're probably 3 quarters of the way through, or and mind you, this has to be prorated as well. So if you're in one of the high demand categories, which is like, the IT sector or accounting or whatever it is, you're competing with the rest of the world in nursing, engineering, health science, computer science, blah, 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 everything. So ultimately, look at your chances. When I explain it to you like this, you have a very, very slim chance, my man, of actually um, getting an invitation. And I think the last round, they're saying they invited some, like, 100 people, 150 people, 100, some ridiculous amount of numbers. And that is actually because you are competing. And mind you, if you're from India, please take note that you are competing with people from the UK, from the US, that actually speak fantastic English and have, they um, pass the English really easily, so they'll get 20 points. But at the same time, their qualifications are equivalent to that of somebody in Australia. So, especially for the UK, because we're all Commonwealth countries, what happens is a doctor would match up with a doctor in Australia. I mean, faster than somebody of from India. Okay. So when you actually look at it realistically, your chances of actually getting an invitation is quite slim, but it's not as slim as Canada. It's not as slim as Canada. I'll tell you that much. So you have a very good opportunity, but if you are sitting there stressing like, oh, why, I have to tell you, it is hard work. It is hard work, and unless you're working on your application full time, like how we do it, you got to push it. Like, I honestly, I think I had to do it like 4 times, 5 times for a lot of our clients before we even got an invitation. And mind you, this is not an EOI. We don't do that. I have to actually talk to the government. Like, I send emails and oh, can you please have a look at this person? This person meets the requirements, this person doesn't meet the requirements, this how that, I'm always doing stuff. So I'm very proactive. But if you are serious about this whole thing, then yeah, you need to do that. So I've gotten through the skills assessment and I've gotten through the EOI. So the last part is the application. Okay, so somehow you've belted through everything. Whoa, fantastic, success! I'm like really happy for you. Now we need to actually do the application, and the application is just hard work as well. Okay, so what happens is a work assessment can be done at the skills assessment level, but it doesn't have to be accepted by immigration. So what happens is for especially Indian nationals, and especially because of a lot of fraud documents, bogus documents, fake people, all this stuff. Australian government, yes, they understand what happens in India, but they're not very lenient with it. So they kind of just expect it all to be their way or the highway, and that's not their fault. You have to kind of just deal with it, all right? And so what happens is they've been doing work checks. So work checks, I know for especially in the skills assessment stage, VETASIS has actually sent people. So the Delhi office, or I think they have an office in Bangalore. I know Hyderabad, somewhere. They have another office. They've got one in Delhi, but they have got another office somewhere. And so what they do, what they've been doing, is they actually get a little person, and they go in their car and they go off to all these rural areas where people say, I'm living in Gujarat, out, in, I don't know, Bhavnagar or something, and then I'm staying in Tamil Nadu in Satyamangalam. What they do is they actually send this guy out there and go and look for him. Okay, which is really scary, but they're doing it. They're spending the money and they're doing it. And then on top of that, I'm not sure fully whether Australian immigration is doing anything like that, but Australian immigration has their own outsourcing kind of stuff to do background checks. Okay, so they are doing background checks, and they are checking up on people's documentation, where they're working, all this kind of stuff. So if you don't get that documentation thing right, you might be thinking, oh yeah, my documents are fine and fantastic, but if it's not matching up to what we call um, I have access to what we call a procedures advice manual. So we see what the case officer sees, and if you don't have that matching up, then you're in big shit. Sorry, but you're pretty much I've we this was actually a very sad story, but we had a rejection for a client where they couldn't actually talk to one of the employers. So when they couldn't speak to one of the employers, they weren't going to sit around and email them. They wanted to pick up the phone and call them. And when they couldn't call them, boom, rejection, bang. So I think if you are from India, please take your documentation seriously. This is not something that you should just be mucking around with someone from who doesn't know what they're doing, especially now, because it's actually become more and more serious. And unless you're working on your application full time, or like your wife is working on, or your husband's working on, full time means full time. Like you actually need to make sure everything is prepped and ready really, really nicely. And that's what we call a decision ready application. And obviously, it takes us a lot of time to do that as well. And that's why people pay us. And I will tell you, I don't charge lightly. The reason is because obviously it takes us a lot of time and it takes us a lot of brain power. Like, it's something that you have to actually sit and analyze and analyze. And we're constantly converting. Oh, okay, this person has this, but what's happening in Australia? This person has this, what's happening in Australia? This person has this, what's happening in Australia? So I have to kind of constantly keep going through all these motions to be able to figure out what is the best way. And you know what, frankly speaking, immigration doesn't reply to me either. When I go and I try and contact them, they don't reply to me. I'm no better than maybe one or two of you, but obviously I'm a bit more persistent and I do get through eventually. But it's not fantastic. Okay, so you are wanting to make sure that your documents are perfect, they're right, and everything is done the right way first time around, so that you can get you know without any delays you're going to get your visa. Okay. um I have talked about you going inbound, so this is just generally for the Indian population. They are, if you have any questions, please put them down below. Please like and subscribe. There's a little bell there, because when we put up new videos, it means that you will be able to, get more information quickly. I hope to do a few more informations, and I'm happy to hear topics or questions that you'd like me to talk about. I can only give so much of information because, please, there's a disclaimer to this. Each person's application is individual and it's very unique. So we cannot provide, this is not advice. We are not going to provide, I do not provide advice over these videos. It's just that uh, we give you the generic procedure or whatever's happening. Okay. Quickly before I go, this is what I wanted to tell you about, right? So now you're getting points, 15 points for nomination by a state or territory government agency or sponsorship by a family member residing in regional Australia to live or work in regional Australia. 10 points for a skilled spouse or de facto partner, 10 points for a STEM qualification, certain STEM qualifications, 5 points for a spouse or de facto with competent English, and 10 points for an applicant without a spouse or de facto. So that is actually very interesting. And I think if you follow my next video, I'm going to actually talk about this a little bit more. If you have any questions, put them below and I will see you in the next video. Bye.